If they don't make a deal, there will be bombing the likes of which they have never seen before. That's President Trump's warning to Iran, clear, direct, and backed by firepower. The clock is ticking, a deadline is approaching, and if Iran doesn't sit down at the table, the US is ready to unleash the B-2s. 6 stealth bombers, armed with bunker busters, cloaked in radar-absorbing tech, are already in position. Their mission? Cripple Iran's nuclear program, wipe out its underground missile bases. So how exactly would this happen? What would an hour-by-hour US bombing run on Iran really look like? Let's break it down. Before we dive into the strike plan, let's take a closer look at how the US and Iran got here, because the build-up is just as explosive as what might come next. With tensions rising across Europe, the Middle East, and elsewhere, the terrifying threat of nuclear war has never felt more palpable. Yet for the time being, only 9 countries – the United States, Russia, the United Kingdom, France, China, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea – possess nuclear weapons. But one more country could soon be added to that list – Iran. While Iranian officials have historically denied any intentions of nuclear weapon development, the country has a long-running and well-established nuclear program, and it's believed by experts that the Iranian program will soon reach the all-important 90% uranium enrichment rate, which will then be at the point at which the country could feasibly get to work on a small arsenal of nuclear warheads. Naturally, that's not something that the US and many of its allies around the globe want to see happen. Should Iran gain nuclear weapons of its own, the consequences could be catastrophic. Of course, we can't predict with absolute certainty what would happen, but nuclear weapons would put Iran in a much stronger position to assert dominance across the Persian Gulf. It could expand its territory, ramp up its conflict with Israel, and enjoy significantly greater standing as an independent nation and global geopolitical power, with much greater diplomatic leverage than it has ever enjoyed before. These are just some of the reasons why the US and allies like Israel have worked tirelessly over the years to slow the pace of Iran's nuclear program and intimidate the country into not pursuing nuclear weapon development. But now it seems a more heavy-handed approach may be necessary. At least, that appears to be the thinking of President Trump, who has not shied away from threatening Iran in the strongest of terms. In early March 2025, Trump sent a letter to the Supreme Leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei. In that letter, which represented the first big engagement between the US and Iran since Trump returned to office, the president outlined his desire to negotiate a nuclear deal with the country. When asked what would happen if Iran refused to negotiate, Trump was blunt in his response. "We are down to final strokes with Iran. We are down to the final moments. We can't let them have a nuclear weapon. Something is going to happen very soon. I would rather have a peace deal than the other option, but the other option will solve the problem." And that other option, the bombing, might be closer than anyone expected. So far, however, progress towards any kind of negotiation or agreement has been very slow. In his initial response to the letter, Khamenei said that the US was not trustworthy and that he did not support any direct talks with the Trump administration. The Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, took a different view, saying that he would support talks with the US, but was willing to follow Khamenei's lead. On April 7th, it seemed a breakthrough had been made. President Trump announced that the US and Iran were due to begin direct talks about the nuclear program. "We're having direct talks with Iran, and they've started. It'll go on Saturday. We have a very big meeting, and we'll see what can happen," Trump added, and I think everybody agrees that doing a deal would be preferable. However, Iranian officials quickly responded and played down the talks. On X, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi posted that the talks would actually be indirect rather than direct, as claimed by Trump. He added that the discussions were due to take place in Oman, with an Omani intermediate, the Oman Foreign Minister, Badr al-Busaidi. There have been several rounds of indirect talks between the two countries over the years, but they rarely result in any major changes. In fact, the last direct discussions between the US and Iran on this topic date back to the days of President Barack Obama, who negotiated a nuclear deal with Iran in 2015. But President Trump abandoned that deal in 2018. As such, Iran has since taken the position that it's up to the US and Trump in particular to rebuild trust with Iran, with Araghchi stating clearly the ball is in America's court, and judging by the US military's next move, America is about to spike it. Those words have much more truth to them than Araghchi may have anticipated, as the US is indeed taking this situation highly seriously. Under President Trump's command, at least 6 nuclear-capable B-2 bombers have been positioned in a base on Diego Garcia, an island chain in the Chagos archipelago of the Indian Ocean, which has been used as a joint US and UK military base for decades. The US has a total of 20 long-range strategic stealth bombers. That means that around 30% of the entire fleet is now in the Indian Ocean. It's a big statement, and a US official has confirmed that this movement was not disconnected from Trump's Iranian deadline and the possible threat of military action against Iran. Nicknamed Ghosts of the Sky, B-2 bombers cost a whopping $2 billion each and are some of the most powerful, sophisticated, and advanced stealth bombers ever created. They're immensely difficult to detect, even on advanced radar systems, and capable of carrying both nuclear and conventional payloads to devastate enemy bases, structures, and equipment. In positioning this mighty force around 2,300 miles away from Iranian territory, the US is clearly reinforcing Trump's words. If Iran doesn't come to the table and agree on a deal, the threat of bombing is very real and imminent. But how would a bombing run of Iran's nuclear plants and missile bases be conducted? Let's take an hour-by-hour look at such an attack that for the time being is only hypothetical but could become reality in only a few short weeks. Hour 1. First, the US Aerial Assault Unit would set off from its strategic position on Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. It's important to note that the US could also have positioned its bombers much closer to Iran, in Qatar for example. However, Iran has a decent air defense system. It boasts both the Bavar 373 system and the Russian S-300 PMU-2, each capable of engaging airborne targets at considerable distances. The upgraded Bavar 373-2 can intercept targets up to 186 miles away, while the S-300 PMU-2 has an effective range of about 121 miles. While these systems can't match the extreme range of Iran's ballistic missiles, they still pose a significant challenge to incoming threats. So if the US started launching bombers from Qatar, barely 100 miles away from Iranian territory, Iran could act quickly. It could launch anti-air missiles right away, potentially bringing down bombers and other aircraft before the US could even get them off the ground. However, by taking off from Diego Garcia, beyond the reach of Iranian missiles, the threat of any immediate attack upon takeoff is in effect eliminated. It's believed that the top speed of the B-2 bombers is just over 600 miles per hour, so taking off, it would take them over 3 hours to reach Iranian airspace. Hour 2. While waiting for the B-2 bombers to arrive, the US would deploy and position other aerial forces in the area. Namely, we would expect to see FA-18 Super Hornet and EA-18G Growler fighter jets take off from aircraft carriers positioned in the Arabian Sea. Their roles would be clear. Some will focus on clearing a path through the air defenses of Iran. Others, meanwhile, will essentially escort and protect the vast KC-135 Stratotankers, which are vital for keeping the mission going, providing refueling capabilities for the jets and, more importantly, the B-2 bombers. It's believed that around 100 of these fighter jets are currently stationed in locations around Iran, like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Jordan, ready to fly and strike targets as soon as they receive the order. Hour 3. With the B-2s still en route, the tankers and accompanying jets would take up position in friendly airspace over Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, squadrons of Super Hornets would likely be sent onward over Iran, equipped with GBU-53 precision-guided glide bombs, ready to drop them on the Iranian anti-air missile systems, making it much safer and easier for the B-2s to proceed. Hour 4. Approximately 3 hours into the mission, the B-2s would arrive at their destination. Even though they have a maximum range of around 6,000 nautical miles and would only have completed about 1,800 by that point, they'd still need to refuel to effectively carry out the remainder of their mission. So the next step would be to line up the B-2s besides the Stratotankers for refueling. Meanwhile, the Super Hornets would form a protective circular formation, ready to respond to any potential threats from the ground. Once the B-2s are refueled, they'll fly onward. This is where the Growlers deploy their secret weapon, a flurry of electronic noise, which serves to bamboozle enemy radar systems and confuse ground forces. It makes it almost impossible for the Iranians to track the fleet's movements. So even if they know that the bombers are on their way, they won't know which direction they're traveling or where they are at any given moment. Hour 5. At this stage of the mission, the B-2s would likely diverge from one another, each following its own pre-planned flight path to a specific target destination. And at this point, it's important to understand exactly what those targets would be and why the US would need to use its most powerful bombers and most explosive ammunition to deliver a truly knockout blow. Iran has historically relied on its natural barriers in the form of the Elburz mountain range, which stretches across the northern part of the nation, and the Zagros Mountains, which run along its western border to defend its territory. In the past, when fending off land-based invading forces, opposing armies had to travel around and between these mountain ranges. They were funneled into tight spaces, making it relatively easy for the people of Iran to defend their territory. In the modern age, warfare has changed a great deal, but Iran still uses those same mountains to defend itself. In fact, it's built many of its missile bases and nuclear facilities deep beneath those very same mountains. That means there are dozens upon dozens of feet of natural rock formations protecting Iran's so-called missile cities, with many believed to be well over 100 meters or 330 feet beneath the surface. On top of that, these bases have been heavily fortified. They've got around 8 feet of concrete layered on top of them. plus gigantic 25-ton blast doors positioned throughout underground passageways, guarding huge stocks of missiles, launchers, and other weaponry. These blast doors are said to be capable of withstanding a 30-megaton nuclear explosion as close as a mile away. Additionally, there are numerous underground passages that connect many of these bases and facilities. So if an impending attack is detected in one location, missiles and other equipment can be quickly relocated through the tunnels to a new place, with blast doors and reinforced walls helping to minimize any damage. Iran has called its subterranean missile cities a nightmare for its enemies, and it's true that pretty much no aerial force on Earth has the bombs needed to even dent these bases, except for the US Air Force, that is. Ever since the development of Iran's underground bases came to light, the US has worked on developing bombs capable of reaching such extreme depths, blasting through many feet of rock to reach their targets. The result of their efforts is the 30,000-pound GBU-57 MOP, or Massive Ordnance Penetrator, otherwise known as the Bunker Buster bomb. Far greater in size and power than any previous bunker busters ever created, the GBU-57s are over 20 feet long and can only be carried by big bombers like the B-2, and they're capable of penetrating up to 200 feet of reinforced concrete or earth. Now that's not quite enough to reach the Iranian facilities situated more than 300 feet below the surface. However, the US has gone one step further to improve this technology. It's found a way to use precise GPS guidance technology to allow B-2s to drop multiple bunker busters on the same spot. So the first one could burrow 200 feet into the ground, while the second one follows its path and hits much deeper down in order to reach the subterranean bases. Hour 6. So with each equipped with 2 of these bombs, giving them enough firepower to target bases as far as 400 feet underground, the B-2s would fly over Iran to their targets, soaring to heights of up to 50,000 feet above ground. Some would likely head west to the Zagros mountain range, while others would chart a course north, aimed at the bases beneath the Elburz Mountains. Meanwhile, US analysts based in underground command centers would keep tabs on various real-time data feeds, ready to redirect and advise the aerial forces if they are spotted by Iranian radars or targeted by either ground-based weapons or Iranian air forces, which includes the likes of MiG-29 and F-14 fighter jets. Those jets are not as capable or powerful as those at the disposal of the American forces, but would still be capable of dealing some serious damage to any B-2s that cross their path. However, it would be unlikely that the Iranian radars would even manage to detect the B-2s. As mentioned, these jets are immensely stealthy, with distinctive flying wing shapes that help keep them hidden from enemy radar screens. They're also coated with radar-absorbing materials, giving them an even smaller radar signature, and boast multispectral camouflage capabilities to hide them from the likes of infrared, acoustic, and electromagnetic surveillance systems too. Even if Iran managed to spot the B-2s and send jets their way, America's forces would retaliate. Growlers would continue to flood the airwaves with static noise, confusing enemy surveillance systems, and F-18 Super Hornets would be more than a match for the Iranian F-14s and MiGs. Hour 7. Thanks to this cloaking technology, the B-2s should be able to stealthily and safely make their way to their targets. Once in position, they could deploy their bunker buster bombs, one after another. The bombs, guided by military-grade GPS systems, would hit their targets with pinpoint precision. The first wave would blow huge holes in the ground, while the secondary bombs would fly directly into those craters and connect with the bases beneath. The bombs would have to be dropped from heights of around 20,000 feet, so the B-2s would descend before releasing them. This gives the bunker busters time and space to adjust in air in order to hit their targets. Then the B-2s could rise back up, safe and hidden among the clouds. In an instant, colossal amounts of Iranian military hardware would be destroyed, and years of the country's hard work in its nuclear program would be wiped out. Hour 8. As soon as the first bombs fell, Iran would be sure to respond. It could deploy some of the many anti-air missile launchers it has hidden in the underground labyrinth, bring them to the surface, firing off missiles into the sky, and then bring them back down to relative safety before reloading and repositioning. It's also likely that the country's surface-to-air or SAM sites would activate, firing a volley of salvos into the sky. Of course, the US would have anticipated this, and it's likely that most, if not all of those missiles would fail to find any target, thanks to the heavy interference and use of decoys among the US aerial forces. Growlers would continue to confuse enemy surveillance, while F-18s soar across the sky to support the B-2's escape. Hour 9. By now, all of the B-2s should have deployed their bombs and struck their targets. With Iranian missiles lighting up the sky and the ground in chaos, the B-2s would need to head west towards safe airspace as soon as possible. They'd leave Iran behind and proceed into Iraq, where more stratotankers would await, assuming Baghdad permits US access to its airspace, ready to refuel the bombers. The F-18s would fly onward, patrolling the surrounding airspace in case of any last-minute aerial assaults from the Iranian side. Then, once they were out of the danger zone, the US fleet could retreat to the safety of Diego Garcia once more, land at one of the many other safe US military bases in the region, or even begin the long flight back to the US. All in all, over the course of a single day, US bombers could wreak havoc on Iran's nuclear program and military bases, even those that Iran thinks are among the safest and most secure on the planet. Its missiles could burrow deep beneath the earth, blasting away huge chunks of mountainous landscapes to reach the bases underneath, dealing unprecedented damage in a matter of minutes. Iran is confident it could rebuild, even if it suffered such an attack, with former Israeli Deputy National Security Advisor Chuck Freilich stating, "Iran has the requisite knowledge today to reconstitute the program, even after a completely successful attack. Military action is thus no longer an option for eliminating the program, only for gaining time." However, given the sheer amount of damage a US bomb strike could do, and the sight of B-2 bombers not all that far away, Iran may now need to rethink its position, take a seat at the table with President Trump, and negotiate a nuclear deal. If not, disaster is surely on the horizon for the country. What do you think about Trump's tactics towards Iran so far? Could a B-2 bombing run actually happen in the not-too-distant future? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to The Military Show for more news and updates about the rising tensions across the Middle East and beyond.